All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's session. It's time to retire your legacy backup. Today's speaker is Alan Holmes. He is a sales engineer here at HYCU. He has 20 plus years of experience as a sysadmin, and now he's at HYCU where he helps companies modernize their data protection strategy. So he's going to be a great, knowledgeable speaker today, and thank you for joining us today, Alan. Um, so if you have any questions out there in the audience, please feel free to ask away in the questions tab. I'll be back at the end to share those questions here with Alan. And if we don't have time at the end to get to all of them, we will follow up afterwards. Don't worry. For now, I'm going to turn it over to Alan, and everyone enjoy the session.
Perfect. Thanks for the setup there, Matthew. Appreciate it. And thank you all for taking a couple minutes out of your day to talk about retiring your legacy backup solution. What does a true backup as a service solution look like? And that's kind of what we're going to dive into. Let's just kind of see what the agenda here looks like. Basically, we are going to talk about a challenge about protecting your hybrid cloud environment. We're seeing it more and more as people are making the transition from strictly on-prem to various cloud offerings at application and even workload levels. So what does a modern data protection solution look like? And we'll contrast that with kind of what we've been doing in the industry for backup for the last several decades, right? And then what does the right backup as a solution look like? What are the key features and components you need to be looking for? And then how does BaaS reduce data protection cost of ownership, right? How can you save money by using a solution like that? And then we'll even talk a little bit about a customer that we spoke to who asked us that very question. So we'll kind of give you a little bit of an illustration of what that looks like. So, all right, let's talk about challenge of protecting the hybrid cloud environment. And it really kind of puts the components of the challenges over into three different buckets. And the first is basically with more complexity in terms of cloud solutions comes less visibility. And what do we mean by that? Basically mixing those public and private and cloud environments, you've got more management planes to log into, right? You've got more entry points, which are all then conducive to attacks or even just simple failures due to that particular management console becoming unavailable or something in that particular cloud environment not working. But additionally, with that, those environments are oftentimes siloed by different teams, right? You've got different people who are managing different aspects of the business in those different cloud environments, which really kind of reduces visibility to the environment and the data as a whole from the entity. And we're finding that really that lack of visibility into the whole environment is one of the top threats to cloud computing these days. And we'll explain a little bit more about what we mean by that too as we kind of continue on. But less control comes with that hybrid cloud environment. What do we mean by that? Again, kind of going back to how each of those teams are managed, responsible for their own pieces of the organization's overall cloud and application and data strategy, right? The IT and security folks just don't always get the best view into those environments because they are managed by other teams throughout the organization. Just one of the kind of things that comes along with those types of models. But also the kind of what we've seen, honestly, in a lot of different conversations with organizations, there's a giant misconception that we put it in the cloud, it's protected. And that's not really true. I mean, the cloud providers absolutely will tell you that your data will be accessible, and they'll be able to guarantee that to a large degree. Redundancies and also all that kind of stuff. But what they can't say is that it will be protected. So if something happens, if an attack gets in there and corrupts data, encrypts data, or other malicious type intent, or even just accidental stuff, they can't necessarily go back in time and recover that data. So that's a misconception there. And what we see is that most of those cloud providers do have that kind of shared responsibility model defined in their contracts. And they're like, we'll make your data accessible, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be protected, right? The last category really just comes with risks because we go back to that whole concept of the different entry points, right? And we're actually seeing ransomware attacks on average every 11 seconds. And that's kind of a sobering number to know that, just in the time that we've been talking already, there's been a dozen or more successful attacks on different organizations and their data. And with all those complex environments, I kind of alluded to this before, and basically introducing more chances for human error, right? They always say that the weakest link in the security chain is your human beings, right? And that's true. So you see that kind of in cloud environments now, just with all the different hands that are in the pot as you try and delegate those responsibilities, so you don't have to have a small team kind of in charge of everything. Well, now you've got more hands that are potentially going to introduce problems, whether accidentally or hopefully not intentionally. All right. Speaking of numbers, let's take a look at those numbers behind the threats of ransomware. So first one here, 78, and that is the percentage of organizations who have been a victim of some sort of cyber attack just this year in 2022 alone. So over 3/4 of the organizations out there have, to some degree, been hit and successfully by some sort of cyber attack. We already talked about 11 seconds being the average number of ransomware attacks in 2021. That number's fluctuated a little bit, but it's still kind of right in that same realm, which is, again, pretty sobering. This one, if these other two didn't get the radar up, this one should tier. 16 is the average number of days that an organization will be down due to some sort of successful ransomware attack. And you think about the amount of revenue that your organization generates on a daily basis, or should be generating. That all goes away. You have the extended costs of having your people in trying to rebuild the environment, or maybe there's consulting or other forensic type parties that have to kind of be brought in to look at this. Put all that together. Some of these companies, they don't come back from this in a lot of cases, to a large degree. But this is just think about that being down for half a month. Pretty crazy. Which then translates into one of the more frightening numbers, and that is 7.5, which is the number in billions of dollars that it cost ransomware, or cost companies who had to recover from ransomware attacks in 2019. And that's all from lost revenue. That's equipment that maybe needed to be rebuilt and replaced. It could be that consulting fee, but it's also people who felt they had no other recourse other than to pay the ransom on top of it. So again, sobering numbers, I think. So let's talk a little bit then about where is the company's data? Where is your organization's data, and is it protected? That's where we really want to talk about what a modern data protection solution looks like. Got a little bit of a diagram here that shows HYCU's approach, and basically our approach was to build purpose-built data protection solutions for each of the types of environments that you see companies use. We try and further simplify that by not only natively protecting that data in those environments, but centralizing that policy management, looking how is each component of that data protected, so that you can effectively do that from a centralized view. So again, you aren't having each of these teams responsible for their own data protection. And of course, being able to monitor and do analytics on that data as well. It's just a key component of exactly what we're trying to do with our platform that we call HYCU Protege. So that's kind of where I want to start, as this kind of an overview. That's sort of a high level view of what HYCU is trying to do for organizations around the world. We'll get into some network diagrams, which is kind of where I like to live anyway. I love myself a good Visio diagram. Great. So let's take a look at kind of what a example organization might look like, and we'll have a little bit of a show and tell here in a second here. But basically, you got your on-premise environment. You have some sort of public cloud environment. We'll say Google and Azure, AWS could be on there too, even other private cloud vendors. But HYCU will come along and be able to deploy its solution, its virtual appliance, right alongside your virtualization or hyper-converged infrastructure, basically capable of backing up to local storage, right? We can also write those off-site, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here in just a second. You could also have that public cloud environment where you've got workloads or applications and things running there that are assisting the business. And in a lot of cases, you'll see some sort of replication, whether either at the application or data level, or even at the storage level, replicating to that cloud environment. essentially feeding it. Order entry and things like that, maybe on premise, that feeds to some sort of a inventory system or something that's available in the cloud. Or tons of examples of what that might look like. And of course, HYCU can natively back up that cloud environment too with our backup as a service solution. Talked a little bit about this before, and I'll just kind of bring it up again, and we're going to kind of maybe drive it home a little bit here in just a second. But most of your traditional backup solutions in that cloud environment are essentially a copy of what happens on-prem running in the cloud, and that's not what HYCU is, and we're going to talk a little bit about that too, but it is truly a service. Furthermore, like I had kind of mentioned, being able to take those local backups, write them out to cloud storage. So now you have offsite storage, being able to replace things like linear media, getting rid of the tape drives that still are prevalent out there. And being able to have that offsite data to recover from in the event something does happen on premise and you don't have that local copy. Furthermore, a lot of the cloud solutions and even local storage solutions that HYCU integrates with makes use of immutable data. So you can essentially lock that data after we're done writing it, so that nobody can delete it. You can't delete it from the HYCU interface. You can't delete it at the storage level. People can't get in and edit it or encrypt it or anything like that, which really kind of makes that data ultra secure. So that's kind of where that's headed. We also, of course, have a native solution for Office 365 so that we can protect your company's SharePoint and Teams environment, and of course, email and contacts and calendar invites and all that stuff too, to be able to lock that away in S3 storage as well. And the whole encompassing platform, as I had mentioned too, is called HYCU Protege, and that's what allows you to manage all of this from one single pane of glass. All right, so selecting the right backup as solution, what does that look like? What should you be looking for? Again, we're categorizing this basically into three different buckets, and the first being that it's truly delivered as a service, right? We aren't taking our on-prem solution or some sort of virtual appliance along with its many complex data movers and proxy servers and enterprise scheduling servers and reporting services and agents that you got to put on all the machines and moving that onto a different environment and calling it cloud. It's not truly a subscription that does all of that without the need for the complexity of an on-premise solution. And on top of that, as I kind of just said, agentless. We don't have a whole bunch of little pieces of software that need to get deployed on all of your resources in order to gain windows into them, because we are integrated directly with those cloud providers. And being cloud native, second category here, it allows you to scale with the cloud. So basically, I don't have to figure out that I need this giant appliance to back something up, only to find out that I didn't really need all that, or I undersized and now I need to go out and spend more on hardware and expand this expensive solution. We grow with you, basically scaling into the cloud as your environment scales, as your data protection strategy maybe scales. And all of that helps keep utilization costs down, right? You're not paying for stuff you're not using. From a storage standpoint, for sure, but also kind of going back to the deploying basically a cloud washed on-premise environment into your cloud environment. There's no, I don't have a bunch of compute resources being used by your backup solution sitting there running, waiting for something to happen. It's only charging, essentially. It's only being used when data is actually moving through the organization. And then lastly, we're bringing complexity and compliance, right? With this kind of overarching view of the entire environment, it really lowers the learning curve. I don't have 7 different products that I got to learn in order to protect my company's data. The interface is crazy simple. The architecture is simple, gives you quicker outcomes in terms of being able to get those solutions deployed and the data protected. You're talking about minutes instead of having to have a consulting firm on site for 5 days just to get your backup solution built. And then lastly, streamlining those policies across the organization. What's my critical data? What's my important data, and what stuff does not really fall into the category of super critical? You can kind of streamline your policies, and the fact that we integrate with various single sign-on and identity access managers, whether you're using Azure AD, Google IAM, Okta, we basically can plug into all that so that your backup solution is honoring the environment that you've already built out, so that nobody who should be in there is doing things that they shouldn't be, kinds of things. So pretty straightforward. So it all comes down to dollars and cents, right? So how does this backup as a service lower my cost of ownership? Well, we already talked a little bit about less time and resources. I don't have a bunch of equipment running in my cloud environment, chewing up compute cycles that I have to pay for. It's a service, and so while data is moving, sure, there's a little bit of a cost inside, but we aren't running some big appliance that's chewing up compute cycles. Fewer tools, right? Again, not having to manage different data protection solutions for each environment that you're present in the organization. It really just reduces your reliance on all these different separate tools that your people have to be trained for, have to maintain access for, and things like that. And then lastly, just ransomware ready. We talked about the fact that the data is immutable, that it's locked away in different places. Really reduces the likelihood that you're going to get in a position where so many organizations find themselves where they feel like they gotta pay the ransom. So all this together, kind of we had actually a customer who asked us this very question. Well, hey, my cloud provider already provides a backup solution and it's free. So why would I pay for some sort of a data protection solution when my cloud solution already gives it to me for free? So this is what we showed them. This was a customer who was using Microsoft Azure. Yes, the service was free. But they were writing all of their backups based on how that free service was designed to work, and they were using a ton of storage, and it was costing them to basically maintain all that data, which they didn't have a whole lot of control over. They didn't have control over how long it sat there. They didn't have any control over whether it was tagged as important or medium level importance or low importance. They didn't have any way to really control it or view that it was there. HYCU, on the other hand, with that centralized policy management, you decide what's important and what isn't. You get to tell us where to put it in terms of what tier storage. And on top of that, we're doing storage efficiencies, right? Rather than taking exact copies of your data all the time and storing them for, in this particular case, I think the solution they were looking at only let them keep it for 7 days. We can retain it much longer, but utilizing storage efficiencies where we're only simply backing up changed data, being able to do incremental kind of forever backup models, we were using half the amount of storage in their cloud environment, saving them a ton of money, even when you factor in the licensing costs, right? So this is kind of just one very simple example of how we were able to really kind of have that aha moment for a particular organization, which their eyes were open, and they made the decision to move over to HYCU pretty quick, and they're real happy with where we're at. So we're kind of getting noticed, and it just kind of do the toot our own horn sort of slide here, but basically Gartner has recently recognized us as a visionary on the Magic Quadrant. We made our first appearance there, not just with Gartner, but there's all kinds of industry type technical review, up and coming, look at these companies kind of organizations that we've started showing up on their radar too. We're rapidly moving to that upper right, which is where we look to go, especially when you look at some of the people that are in that realm. And I talked about kind of that legacy backup and kind of cloud washed, even just kind of taking that old methodology and trying to apply it to cloud. We're starting to displace a lot of that. We're seeing it pretty much every day. So more to come on that, I'm sure, from what I've heard. So looking forward to kind of seeing our name out there a little bit more, but just keep a lookout. So I guess I hope that was helpful. I hope that you kind of got a little bit of insight. It was a little bit of what HYCU does. Please, check out the website. You can scan this QR code if you want to try out any of our products or get in touch with somebody. We can kind of give you a look at what the platform does and show you how we can actually improve your data protection strategy and how it will work in your business. So again, thank you so much for the time. I appreciate you giving me a few minutes to listen. And Matthew, I will kick it back to you and see if anybody had any questions that came up.
I'm back. Thank you so much, Alan. It was great to to learn from you as someone who's in marketing. I always learn when I hear the sales engineers talk about how the product works and the value that it brings to companies. So I love listening to everything you had to say. But we do have time for a couple questions, and we can dive into these right now. So the first one here is from someone who is building out their hybrid cloud environment right now, and they were wondering, if you had any advice on the best way to migrate from the on-prem environment to the cloud, and what can HYCU do to help?
Okay, perfect. Yeah, and we're seeing a lot of this where even the people who are a little cloud averse to begin with are starting to see the value in it and are wanting to migrate that a lot of that on premise environment to some sort of a cloud environment. And there's really a couple ways of going about it. Some people are basically starting new in the cloud and basically designing their application for the cloud, but the overwhelming majority don't have the budget necessarily to make that jump that quick, and so that's maybe a phase 2 approach. So kind of phase 1, what we're seeing is more the lift and shift model, where they're going to try and take their on-premise environment and figure out a way to get it running on virtual instances in various cloud environments. Can HYCU help with that? Absolutely. We do have the ability, and I kind of touched on it on the one network architecture slide, where you're basically running the backups of your on-premise VMs to local storage, but also sending copies out to cloud. The fact that we are also cloud native, we have the ability to essentially take those backups that are sitting in that cloud storage and instantiate VMs from that backup data, essentially taking a copy of your on-premise workload, on-premise virtual machines, on-premise applications, and bringing them up in that native cloud environment. And we have had customers who have used us for exactly that, basically trying to get that first presence in the cloud. And like I said, then maybe a phase 2 would be to look at something more like a native containerized development, some sort of a project to kind of maybe make their application more cloud native. But as that first step, kind of getting a copy of their on-premise VM running in a cloud environment to kind of make that first step into the cloud. So I hope that kind of answered the question, but that's definitely what we're seeing.
Yeah, I've heard the phrase lift and shift a lot, and heard how easy HYCU makes it. But what does that look like without HYCU? That's something that I've never heard before.
Yeah, I know there are consulting firms who will attempt to do migrations of that, and it's probably a very similar type of process, but it's one of those things where you can pay a consulting firm a lot of money to do that. But something that we pretty much can do. I hesitate to use the single click, terminology, because it usually takes you 5 or 6 clicks to get to that single click. But and that's really what it is. I mean, we can do that in just a few clicks. You've got a little bit of pre-work to build up and join those links together between your on-premise environment and the cloud environment. But it's really to hit that spin up button in HYCU and say, put this VM in the cloud. It's crazy easy. Rather than having a team of consultants that are trying to facilitate that for you over a couple of weeks' time and cost you a lot more money.
Yeah, so it's the difference between self-service and being on someone else's timeline, kind of, right?
That's a great way to put it. Yep. Fantastic.
Awesome. All right, so another question here, which I think is maybe a little related, but you mentioned earlier about DR, and they want to know if you can elaborate on how HYCU helps address DR needs.
Great question. So there's a couple of answers to this, and Matthew, like you said, it's kind of almost the same answer, but certainly if you've got dual environment where you're running production workloads in one cluster, maybe you have a standby cluster, HYCU can actually facilitate backups of those VMs from that production cluster to a DR environment that you could then restore in that DR environment if you needed to. I know there's tons of replication solutions out there too, but we are seeing a lot of organizations, even ones that might be a little surprising to you, who have done the cost analysis and realized that it really costs a lot of money to have those standby data centers, those standby virtualization clusters, kind of waiting for something bad to happen. On top of that, we're actually seeing where some of those replication strategies, where they'll actually mirror the environment, are really good in a high availability. The link got cut, switch everything over to this environment type failover solution. But customers are realizing that they need a safety net, right? We talked a little bit about ransomware, and I hope I don't go too far off the trail here, but many of these ransomware attacks, they got into the organization a lot sooner than people even realize. They'll lay dormant for 2 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever it is, kind of in a listen and learn mode. While they're learning credentials, they're learning what people are accessing. It's essentially learning what data to attack. And then when the time comes and it starts actually attacking things, that's when everybody realizes it's there, right? With these replication, these failover solutions, unbeknownst to them, they've been replicating that stuff that's just been lying dormant for the last several weeks, right? So failing over to this environment doesn't necessarily do any good because it's compromised just like your production environment was. On top of that, along with the costs of maintaining that failover data center, people are looking to us, looking to HYCU, to be able to use public cloud as their DR solution, right? And so what HYCU can do, we talked again about this ability to take the backups of your VMs and bring them up in public cloud. That's exactly what they're doing for a DR strategy. So if you've got an organization, for example, you've got 100 VMs, but you designate 20 of them as absolutely business critical. These 20 machines run the applications, the ERP system, the services, or whatever that we need essentially to keep the business running, to keep the lights on. So what you can do is with HYCU essentially kind of mark those 20 machines or that subset of your entire environment, because probably they don't need print servers and 5 domain controllers running in their cloud environment in the case of a disaster, right? So they take that subset of those critical workloads and they'll license them for that spin up functionality that we talked about. And in the event that they have something like that, where even in a situation where they have their standby data center, they realize that ransomware has been replicated, they can go back to a point in time from HYCU before the infection, and they can literally spin those critical workloads to keep the business running, to keep the people being able to answer the phones, orders, shipping, whatever it is, keep that running in a public cloud environment, basically DR on demand. They don't have to pay a thing for it essentially until they bring it up in their environment, and then they're able to utilize it at that point while they triage their on-premise environment, get everything cleaned up, and when it's all set to go, they can bring that back online either by redeploying or whatever. But we also have the ability of going the other direction too. So if you do have that your critical workloads running in the cloud, we do have the ability of essentially taking a backup of it at that point, or a snap of that, and being able to bring it back down on premise and spin it back up in your on-premise environment. So being able to utilize public cloud is kind of a DR on demand, something that we're seeing more and more these days too, just kind of as a safety net and as a cost savings, really. So long-winded answer to what I think was probably a very simple question, but I hope that kind of answered it.
No, that was a great answer. Thank you. Probably not the way you want to, move your workloads to the cloud. You don't want to do it because of ransomware, but
right.
That is one way to do it, right?
That's correct.
But we try to avoid that. Look, that's a lot of stuff has to go wrong before you get there.
Correct.
All right, well, that is time for us. I want to thank everyone in the audience who attended and listened to Alan. And I want to thank Alan for all of his insight and knowledge today. And yeah, I'm really bad at closing these things out, so I'm just going to say goodbye. Yeah, anything from you, Alan?
Not at all. Just thanks so much, Matthew, and thanks again, everybody, for taking time out of your day to listen to me. I appreciate that. So thanks so much.
And everyone out there, have a great morning, evening, night, wherever you are. Take care. Bye.